Chrysler's bankruptcy, not only the end of the era for the U.S. automaker, but also perhaps an end of the era for the private equity business, according to our guest today, Dan Gross. He writes the Money Box column for Slate, also writes for Newsweek. And Dan, so private equity guys, Cerberus, obviously, they did not do very well with this Chrysler deal, but you're talking this is a bigger issue than just Chrysler.
Yeah, I think what we've seen this year, really starting with the Tribune Company bankruptcy, is a series of deals done in 2007. 9 of the 10 biggest leveraged buyouts were done between 06 and 07, and so many of them are going belly up. They bought into cyclical industries right at the peak and loaded a ton of debt on them, which is not a winning proposition.
And your point is they basically did what a lot of U.S. homeowners did, or would-be homeowners did.
Yeah, I argue in my new book, Dumb Money, which I think you've got somewhere there, that the characteristics of this late credit bubble were that corporate people and financiers did the exact same thing with debt that homeowners did. Homeowners took home equity lines of credit and called it income. These guys would buy a company, issue a bond, pay themselves a dividend, and say, hey, investment returns.
Money, right, yeah.
In the same way, lenders lowered their standards to push money into mortgages. They lowered their standards to push money to private equity guys, the equivalent of kind of no documentation loans.
Although I would say in the case of a lot of the private equity deals, it's different because they're not on the hook for this, right? I mean, especially look at the 2005, 2006 deals, that big dividend payment was investment return, and the rest is gravy.
Well, not only that, they pay themselves fee for completing a transaction and managing it. But the 2007 vintage deals, HCA, biggest hospital company, TXU, this giant utility in Texas, Clear Channel, the biggest radio company. These deals got so big and took on these iconic brand names, not just Chrysler, but also GMAC. There's an article in the New York Times yesterday about Clear Channel, where the private equity firms Bain and Thomas Lee sued the banks to close. The banks knew that this was a bad, this was too late in the cycle. They sued them to close, and basically a year later saying, well, gee, our cash flow isn't looking so good. Let's renegotiate.
Right. So, I'm sorry. So what are the implications, though, for the economy? Because I'm sure a lot of people out there are saying, so who cares if these private equity guys screwed themselves?
Well, private equity has been a very important player, number one. They've gotten really big. A lot of big institutions, the university endowments, pension funds, in the last few years allocated tons of money to these guys. This became part of the Yale strategy with David Swensen saying, put more money into hedge funds and private equity. So more of us than we might think actually have our fortunes tied to how these people are doing. And they are in control of some really important businesses and in industries. And we rely on people like this to wade into difficult situations to execute turnarounds. This is a source, theoretically, of new capital for troubled industry. If they are not going to be out there, if they are going to be sort of hamstrung by these losses, the ramifications are a little larger than simply the Hamptons real estate market.
And that's really the key, though. It's the folks all the institutions who have invested in private equity, and it's the companies with this debt that, of course, has no covenants on it, so it's going to take years to work out, all that stuff. I mean, when we talk about the downfall of private equity, you suddenly have the image of Henry Kravis outside with a cup. Not going to happen. I mean, they're in great shape. They took care of themselves first. No issue.
Yeah,
it's just what
the
happens
biggest investors in private equity are these public employee pension funds, CalPERS, the Harvard Endowment. Harvard will be okay, but other university endowments or charitable foundations that put money into this. This is part of their asset allocation now, and if they're not getting returns from that, then you can see how that would trickle down pretty quickly to all sorts of segments of the economy.
Right, and it would seem that leaves the federal government as the last source of capital left, really.
As always.
As always, right.
That's been the story.
Dan, thanks very much.